So what we've got here is a power steering pump from a 2004 model Impreza. This is from a WRX, and we're going to open it up and rebuild it with new gaskets. So we've had some leak. The power steering's actually been alright, but we've had some leaking. It's come from around the top here somewhere, and that's indicative of a bad gasket. It's obviously leaking. I've tried to clean this up a little bit. There's still a bit of gunk around there, but it's made quite a dirty engine bay, and the power steering fluid's been getting low, so it's obviously been going somewhere. I've taken off the sensor. You have a little wire that goes from this nipple here and it clips up here, and I've taken off the pulley which sits in there. Right, so the first thing I'm going to do is just take it off this bracket here, just from this one bolt, just to get rid of some of the auxiliary bits that are on this. Right, now that's off, you can see it is very dirty. It was a bit of a hard place to clean, so now that's off, I'll give that a clean. Just kick the bolt in there so I know exactly where it comes from. And then the next thing I'm going to do is take off these 4 bolts around the corners. Right, with those 4 bolts out, this is now loose, so I'll proceed to take it off. So now that faceplate is off, this is what the power steering pump looks like on the inside. So the pulley, which goes on the other side of this spindle, it turns that, and as you can see, it'll be turning fast, and these vanes here would be pushed out by centripetal force, like that, pushing this power steering fluid around, similar to a turbo compressor. Continuing with the rebuild, we've got one gasket here, and then we do have another little O-ring down there, all covered in lovely ATF. We've got a little dowel in here that lines up this mechanism, and it also lines up that faceplate, so that can come out. Keep that safe. I've placed that faceplate back on. It's not screwed in, I'm just holding it on just so that those vanes don't fall out. So the next thing I'm going to do is just take off this bracket here with that bolt, and with that off from here down there, I've kept the bolt together. Next thing I'm going to take is that one off. So next I've taken off this one. It's a 19mm, and do be aware that there is a spring on the other side. And using some needle nose grips, I've carefully taken out that ring that was sitting around here. And there were also 2, there's a white plastic and a black rubber dowel that sat opposite to that metal dowel. They sat down here. Ideally, when you're taking any of these things apart, you'll totally take them apart, get rid of all of the old O-rings and gaskets and replace them. However, on the other side, we have that circuit which, for the life of me, I cannot open. I've destroyed too many pairs of pliers trying to get in there. I haven't got a special tool to get in there, so that part wasn't leaking for me. The part that was leaking for me was this main seal, and I think one of the seals up here was also leaking for me. So I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that the rear seal is going to be okay. Any that are accessed behind that circlip, and I'm going to continue putting it back together with the new seals just on this side. So I've now degreased, rinsed and dried the gasket faces. So I've got that larger gasket, there's a notch in there, and then I've got a smaller gasket in there, and then they obviously mate over here and the big one around there. I've cleaned these up a bit. They're still a bit grimy, but a lot better than they started. This is a clean tray. I'm going to reinstall this mechanism that went in here with the dowels, and then I'm going to use some IPA, some isopropyl alcohol, clean up these faces and in here, and then I'll get back with the gaskets. So I've got this ring. It has got a little dimple on the bottom, and I know that's the bottom because I didn't see it when I picked it up, which means that can only go in one way, which is that way. I'm going to put these dowels in first because they're a bit tighter, and then I'm going to shift it over and put in that dowel. So when I was just trying to reinstall this dowel, you can see that there's a changing gradient. There's a lighter bit at the end there and a darker bit around there. So it's meant to go back into the mechanism so that it's only that lighter bit at the end that's sticking out, but I couldn't get it in far enough. And when I looked in there, this outer ring moves and you've got a bit of a hole at the bottom that dowel needs to slot into. So with the outer ring, it was round sideways a bit like that. It wasn't going in far enough, so make sure that ring is lined up with that dowel, so with that hole, so the dowel goes all the way in. So now these are all clean and dry, degreased. I'm going to put the gaskets back in those, one large groove and that one little groove, and then I'm going to put it back together. So I've now put that faceplate back on with the new gaskets in there, and with gaskets, when you tighten them, over time they'll relax, and then you'll lose that torque. So look and see on your new gaskets if there's any directions. On my one, it said finger tighten the bolts and leave it for an hour just to relax, and then come back and torque it up properly. So in an hour I'll come back and I'll torque these in the usual cross pattern just to make sure that the gasket stays flat in there. As this is a non-serviceable pump, there's no official torque figures for those bolts given, but in similar scenarios these should be about 17 foot-pounds or roughly 23 newton meters of torque. So while I'm waiting for that faceplate to dry, I am going to put some of these auxiliary bits back on. So I'm going to start with this one. It's the one with the spring. I'm just going to go and clean this up a bit. Right, so it's all cleaned up now. The part is all degreased, and I've also degreased and put a bit of IPA on there. So the actual gasket it's a bit triangular, if you can see that. It's like a conical shape. So that fit on the inside face in there. You can see the slanted face. So I've now got the gasket in there, and again I've just finger tightened it. I'll come back and tighten it properly in an hour. And now I'm going to move on to these two, the inlet and the outlet for the ATF, for the power steering fluid. So when I was dismantling this and going through the O-rings and the gaskets, I didn't find one that looks bad. I didn't find one that looked like it had broken. However, looking at this with all the congealed gunk around there, I'm thinking it was probably this one. So don't be tempted to double gasket. That's only going to cause problems as they relax. But just maybe look out for things like that. I've got a lot more dirt on this side that I couldn't get off. I've got dirt around there, and it just leads me to think this was my leaking port. So I've cleaned that up. There's a bit of staining left around it, but as long as there's no lumps that are going to keep the port away and keep the O-ring from not seated properly, we should be fine. So I've cleaned it, I've degreased it with ice, proper alcohol, and now I'm going to put my gasket in and again tighten it down finger tight. Right, I've got this port back on finger tight. That one's all cleaned up, degreased, and I'll put that on next. Remember, the gasket is only on this hole. This hole up here is a bolt hole. It doesn't go into the actual pump, so there's no need to have a gasket on that one. Just as long as it's all clean and there's no raised surfaces to keep the gasket from sealing properly. Right, so everything's back together now. I've put on this bracket up here, which isn't tight yet because it goes through that port, so I need to wait until I tighten that up. And I've also put on this bracket here, which goes in the front there, and I've torqued that one up fully because there's no gasket. Right, so it's been an hour, so I'm now going to torque these up. I'm going to start with these ones in a cross pattern, and then I've also got this one up here to torque, and I've got this one here to torque, and lastly this one around here to torque. Right, so that is all torqued up there, and we've got our pulley to put on. So you've got this side where the barrel protrudes and this side where it's flat. So you want to put it so that that protrusion is downwards. If you put it the wrong way, it's just going to rub around the edges here. So make sure you put it downwards like that and make sure it's on fully like that. And then we've got this nut. Be good to put a bit of thread locker on there, and then we'll torque it back up. Right, so this pulley is now on, and I've got the wire to put on now. So one end clips into there. See, it doesn't have to go in very hard, and the other end you just turn around and you've got a little connector that you push through that hole, and hopefully it will clip. But I have got a bit of a bend, so right, I'll just straighten that out. Very quick fix. It's just some pliers, so then that just pushes in like that. You hear a nice little click, and then that's it. I've got the bracket to install it onto, and then it'll be ready to go back in the car. So the pump sits in the bracket like this, but I've been struggling to get that shaft to fit in between those holes, so I'm just going to give it a bit of persuasion and hopefully get it in. Right, this is definitely working well. As you can see, I'm getting there, not quite down there yet, but I don't think I will be able to get this in without giving it a bit of a rubber persuasion. If you're worried about breaking this cable, you can always take it off, or have not even put it back on yet. As you can see, you can get to both parts that you need to when it's in the bracket, so you can leave that off while you're trying to persuade it in. Right, so I've now got it in, and I've got that bolt through. It's not screwed in yet, it's just placed through, because now on this side you've got two other bolt holes to line up. So I've just left that bolt in there. That's not even totally lined up on this side. I've just left that bolt in there to allow it to pivot while I try and line these two other bolts up. Right, so my last two bolts to hold the pump onto the bracket are these two. One bolt there, one bolt's going to go down there. To be honest, I could have put these on before I put the pulley on, but at the end of the day I can still get in there. Might need to use a bit of a extension, but it'll work. And again, I'm going to put these down with a bit of thread locker down. Right, so that is it for the rebuild. I've torqued up that bolt down the bottom, and I've torqued up those two through the pulley at the front. Thread locked, 23 Newton meters. So as I'm sure you know, this is where it came from. You can see down there I've got a bit of a mess, but I've cleaned it up a little bit. It's still a bit wet, but that will burn off when the engine warms up. And so I'll install the power steering pump back in there. We've got 3 bolts. We've got that one that I put in there so that I can remember where it came from, and there's 2 that I've already taken out. You've got one that came with thread locker on, and one other, so I put thread locker back on those. So the one with the red thread locker goes down there, the one without any locker goes in there, and you've also got the other side of your white connector to put back on. So I fitted the bolt down the back, and I found the best way was to go straight down from the top. However, I did break there's a little evap canister that sits around there. You can just see up in there, that's where it screws into. It's not going into focus, but that's where it bolts into. And I did break the evap canister, so you may not have the room down there, or you might break something like I did, so be careful. However, I am trying to fix the evap, but even if I can't, it's only 30 quid for a new one of those, whereas the best I found for a new pulley was a couple of £100. So in my book, it's still a bit of a win, even if I have to get a new evap charcoal canister. I've put all 3 of those bolts on there now, so that's all fit in there properly, and I've got this one more to go through the adjuster. So it goes through that as a clearance hole, and then it's going to screw into the alternator on the other side. The bolt does have a washer, and the washer goes on the outside there. So I've screwed that locking bolt back in. I've pulled the alternator up a bit just to make sure it's not putting any pressure on this other belt, and I've hooked this belt back on, so that belt goes round the outer of that pulley down there, and then it obviously goes round our power steering and back round the alternator. I haven't tensioned it yet. This can still move freely, because I'm going to reattach this input hose, but I'm going to leave the output hose unattached. I'm just going to put a bit of fluid in there, essentially fill it up, before I reattach this, so that when I start the car up, it's not running dry, it's already got the lubrication in there. Remember to put this clip back on, this hose clip, if you took it off, and then just shimmy that hose back on, give it a bit of a push, and then just use some pliers put it back on there. So I've put this on, this one isn't on yet. I've got the sensor there to plug in like that, and that's more or less done. I'm going to fill this up. I've done some other bits off camera, like I've reinstalled the charcoal canister which I'd broken down there. I had taken the alternator out, I've put that back in. So now I'm up to the stage where I'm going to fill the pump up with a bit of ATF. So I'm not going to fill it totally, I'm just going to fill it enough so that I can give it a bit of a turn and it's going to lubricate itself. As you can see, I've got a funnel. It's not really all the way in, but if I pour slow enough, I'm sure I won't make too much of a mess. Right, so I've put the ATF back in. As I put it in, it filled up there and it didn't actually go down. I expected it to go down a little bit, but it fills up and then it will go down when you turn the pulley. So just be aware that it's only going to take a little bit, literally the height of that barrel full of ATF at a time, and then you'll have to pump it in. And I only did that 2 and a bit times and it doesn't want to take any more, so I'm going to make that do. Right, so I've got it back in, belt's round, just need to tension this belt now. A rule of thumb is a belt should go, so this one's one that I haven't messed with, it should go about 1/4 of an inch when you give it a good amount of force, which you can see that one does roughly. I'd say that was 1/4 of an inch, so just got to do the same thing for that. So to do that, you lift the alternator up, you tighten this, it lifts the alternator up and it will tighten the belt, and then once it's tight where you want it, so that will be tight, you tighten that bolt at the front and you also tighten that bolt under there. Right, so I've got it all up and running now, so all I've got to do now is, you can see how low that power steering fluid has gone. Before I started the engine up, that power steering fluid was at the upper mark, and now it's at the lower mark. So all I've got to do now is top that up to the higher mark, do some steering manoeuvres, so left and right, but not all the way to lock, just halfway, 3/4 of the way to lock, and then come back and fill it up again to max, and that will just bleed any bubbles out of the system. So then I'll carry on doing that until it stays at max and doesn't go down any further. Right, my steering's all good now. I've put intake back on, 2 bolts down there, and it clips in. Just give it a bit of a shove in there, you'll hear it click. I have got the alternator cable to clip back in like that, and I've also got this faceplate cover to put back on. It goes on there, so you've got 1 bolt there, which is that one, and you've got 1 bolt there, which is that one here, and you've also got this clip which just clips in there, that's for the throttle cable, and that's it. Once that's done, it's all good to go.